In case I'm going too quickly, then just let me know. Welcome to the webinar on strengths-based learning, which is actually a didactic framework that you can use from approximately the age of 6 years onwards, and you can actually use it up until adult learners. It has been developed in Belgium ever since the late 90s, so a long time ago, and ever since 2018 the UCLL has been working on the development as well, and it has been explored in different European projects. So we're really happy to be able to present it here within academia, and we're going to briefly tell you a little bit about strengths-based learning by defining it and also giving a short illustration of it. We will also look at the theoretical foundations of it. So how is it rooted, mainly in the history of psychology of learning? And we will look at reflection and evaluation, and specifically at self-evaluation as well, because those are important elements within strengths-based learning. And then we'll provide you with a little bit of additional information on where to find more in case you'd like to figure out more about it. So the first part we're going to look at is what is strengths-based learning. We will provide you with an example of a lesson plan to kind of illustrate what strengths-based learning is about, and we will also give you the key concepts of an SBL lesson. So as I said, it's a didactic framework that you can use from young children onwards, and it is actually useful to any type of subject really. So you'll see that when you look at the resources, we have developed lessons on citizenships, education, but also on languages, on mathematics, art, history, but also vocational training. So you could actually use it in a very broad variety of contexts. What is really important within SBL is that it's not the way to learn, but it is proposed as a way to learn. And one of the key elements of SBL is that you've got these pathways of learning from which you can choose to a large extent. And we are firm believers of the fact that students would benefit from a diversity in didactical approaches. It focuses really on strengths combined with energy. So that means that what we want is that the students have got the opportunity to make their own choices and can adapt lesson plans to their own strengths, to what they like to do, to what they're good at, and they take into account what actually provides them with energy, because we have seen in research quite often that if something provides you with energy, you're more likely to hang in there and learn more really. It's self-directed learning, and we see that as a process in which, as an individual, you can take initiative, and that could be with or without the help of others. And what you as a pupil learn to do is actually look at your learning needs and to formulate your own learning goals, to look into identifying material and to evaluating learning outcomes. But we will make students and pupils responsible for that. Learning in a context that is wider than the school environment, it is important to look for learning opportunities outside of the classroom walls. There is more to learn in this world than just things that you will cover within your classroom. So look at the neighborhood, even look at the world, and see where you can find contexts that will help your pupils to learn stuff. And we are convinced that the opportunities outside of a classroom can be provided both by teachers but also by students. So that is important to bear in mind. At a certain time, a course has been developed in which students who are only 12 years old actually created a package on geography for the group of their class, really, and they had to organize a learning opportunity and an outing, which was an obligatory part of their projects, and they organized it all by themselves. So the self-directed part of learning in a wider context than the school environment is not organized by the teacher as such. And then finally, a diversity in behavior is encouraged. And this is a bit tricky because sometimes there's behavior that we see as a bit annoying or hard to deal with. And within SBL, we actually try to have this exhibition of diversity in behavior, which allows students to use their strengths, whereas in some contexts, those strengths might be seen as disturbing because they're too present, for instance. In SBL, we try to embrace their presence and we try to embrace the behavior that they exhibit. I'll show you a small example of an SBL lesson plan, and it is on Antigone. And you'll see that this is a version for 16 to 20-year-old students. So it's an older group of students. It's a good example because it shows you the possibilities of strengths-based learning, but on the other hand, it also doesn't hide the complexity of it, because we're not going to pretend it's not complex, because it is. But throughout the training, you'll see that there's plenty of examples of lessons for other ages, and even very simple ones for very young learners as well. So before I take you to the lesson plan, I would like to tell you to focus on the fact that there's 3 columns. The first column is the watch, and it focuses on the content of the lesson. The second column is the approach that is being used to actually realize the content of that lesson. And the final column, you'll see that focuses on asking for help. So I'll show you now. So first column on the left, what am I doing? How shall I do it? And then asking for help and feedback. You have the possibility as pupils to ask questions whilst you're actually completing assignments. Okay. If we look at these 3 columns, you see that you've got this part in red that says democracy and rights in current context. That's the first part of our lesson. And then you've got the 3 columns underneath, and they've got green squares in every box, really. So what is important to bear in mind? 1, you let your pupils work in smaller groups, so groups of about 5 to 6 students in this case. And what you ask them to do is to read all of the assignments that you can see now, and you ask them to combine the different columns. So this works as follows. They look at the first column and they decide upon an order that they will put forward as to the order that they're going to use to complete the assignments. So let me try to illustrate that for you. So they decide to start with the first assignment at the top, go on a 10-minute internet search, and then as soon as they've numbered the first column assignment, then they're going to link the first column to the second column. And in this case, you see that the first assignment in the second column that they select is that they'll split their group into a smaller group, and that they're going to look at what to that smaller group or that pair is essential and what is not. And then they're going to compare their work afterwards. And then finally, they ask the teacher to mark their work. So this is one group. Another group might as well start with the third assignment in the first column and do the first assignment in the second column first. Okay, so pupils can actually decide for themselves the order in which they want to complete the assignment. Okay, they have to complete the different assignments within their group before they continue to work on the next assignment. Okay. Here you see that there's also a green assignment, and that green assignment is at the bottom of the first part of the lesson, and that means that all of the groups have to end their pathway with this assignment. Okay. And then as a teacher, you've also got a role, obviously. You're always the specialist of what is going on in your class. And you can decide to mix up certain things. You can decide that you have to insert some direct instruction, for instance. But you always have the opportunity to intervene when necessary, but you can also leave a lot of responsibility with your pupils. as soon as the pupils have finished the first part of the lesson, you see another red mentioning there, which is Sophocles, Antigone. And this is about looking at dilemmas and to really go to the bottom of the dilemmas by using theatre play. And if you have a look at the full lesson plan, you'll see that we provide the resources to do that. But actually, the students do the exact same thing. So they look at the different assignments and they number them in the order in which they want to complete their assignments. And then finally, you will see that there's a third part, and that is called discussion and debate. And they are actually going to combine the knowledge and the skills, the knowledge of the first part and the skills of the second part, that the students have developed, and then provide more freedom for the students. They can choose more what their strengths are and what they want to focus on. So if you look at the second column, for instance, you have writing, but you also have creating, you've got making a video. So they can select what their strengths are and what they really want to focus on. This is a lot, I presume, to take in, but obviously we'll make sure that all of the material is available so you can dive into it if you're interested to get to the bottom of it. But there's a couple of central concepts that I would like to point out to you a bit more, because by making your pupil, your learner, the director of the learning process, there's a couple of concepts that you put into practice, and there's a couple of strategies that we push forward and that we really emphasize. And one of them would be to focus on metacognitive strategies. There's a couple of them, obviously. Let's start by planning. So they have to reflect on how they want to create the lesson plan. What are they going to do first? What are they going to do next? How are they going to plan their lesson? They have to reflect on that. Another metacognitive strategy would be monitoring. They must monitor their own time within the group. They can decide to divide roles amongst the group members. They have to keep an eye on the resources that they want to use. They also have to come to a consensus, because if you work in a group, you would not necessarily all want to do things in the same order. So those monitoring strategies are really important. And then thirdly, evaluation strategies. So they have to really look at what they've done, how they've done it, how they felt doing certain things. So there's a lot of trust that you put into your learners to take their learning into their own hands, and also to look at how they would, how they've done certain things and what they could do better in the future, for instance. Then it emphasizes that consensus again, and it says using learner strengths. So I briefly already hinted at this, but you could have a student within a group who proposes to take the lead in a certain assignment, or you could have a group that discusses that they want to divide the roles within a certain assignment. And what we try to achieve within SBL is that students can actually rely on their strengths. They can tell each other, like, look, this is really my strength, I'm good at this, and this gives me energy as well. But the entire group has to agree on how they're going to divide the work and how they're going to get on board completing the work. And then also by actually making sure that there's a multitude of assignments that they can vary in as far as timing is concerned, as far as order is concerned, that gives your students room for negotiation, and they learn to decide stuff in consensus. They learn to discuss certain things together. Helping each other and staying together is also important, because, as we said, they can use their own strength, but they can leave no one behind. So it all relies on collaboration, really. So when a part of the group has finished a certain assignment, they will be asked to help the others and make sure that everybody stays on board. And this is why they cannot continue with the next assignment until the others have finished. And also, by having a lesson, which is obviously limited in time, you provide a certain time pressure that makes sure that they actually keep looking at working together. And then finally, another central concept that is important is providing feedback. That help and feedback can come both from the other members of the working group. It could also come from other working groups, because sometimes we'll ask different groups to provide each other with feedback. And this will broaden their insights and their knowledge on what others did, what others came up with. And then finally, obviously, the teacher as well can provide help and feedback. And as a teacher, you obviously always have the right to intervene when your pupils are working in smaller groups. But by providing that third column that focuses on help and feedback, we also really make sure that as a teacher, there's a time and place for you where the pupils really get to you or come to you with specific questions. Okay, so that's why we say it is all about short-term, but also looking at long-term prospect. By getting used to this giving and receiving feedback, you make sure that pupils get more used to the importance of feedback and the impact of feedback also in the long run. So this was a brief example on an SBL. Just quickly having a look, because I don't see the chats coming in, but Carol, can I count on you? Your mic's out, but you'll shout at me whenever I need to.
I will follow and answer the chats.
Brilliant. Cheers. If there's anything I need to explain more, then just let me know, okay?
Yeah.
Because I've got on this high-speed train, I think, to catch up a bit. Okay. Good. We did not invent this strength-based learning based on nothing. So there's sturdy theoretical foundations, but because of the fact that it would bereave us of too much time to go into all of the theory that is behind SBL, I will only provide you with a brief summary. First of all, of a couple of paradigms that can be found in historical views on the psychology of learning. We will also look at the autogenetic principle. We'll look at 3 ways to actually create things and which one would be the one that would be prevalent within SBL. We'll look at the paradigms of talents and strengths, because it's not the same, as I just saw that Gail already explained in the chat as well. And we'll look at how the learner is actually taking the wheel of the learning process. There's a number of paradigms that can be taken from the historical views on learning, and we focus on the history of learning, on development psychology, on competences and talents, on creativity, and on identity. And in all of those fields, what we notice is there's a dichotomy that defines the historical view of learning. And we will not be elaborating in depth on all of them now, but when you look at the material that we have provided, you will see that there is background information on all of them inserted into those PowerPoints. We've just hidden it for this one because that would take us a bit too far. What we see, without even going into depth, is that within education, there's this tendency to choose for linear learning approaches. rather than focusing on the fact that there's multiple pathways to learn something. And SBL will really go for those multiple pathways, okay? And we see that that paradigm that we refer to here quite often can be linked to that contrast between linear and multiple pathways. And that's why we've tried to catch some of it. Sorry, I'm being too enthusiastic here. We're trying to catch some of it in this one slide, in which you see that there's a number of dichotomies. And we've called it competence-based learning on the one hand and strengths-based learning on the other. And this provides a bit of an overview. So if we look at the first level, the teacher, then we'll see that within the competence-based column, the teacher takes a lot of the decisions. So he or she obviously decides on the content, but also on the progress of the pupils, the criteria that will be used for the evaluation. And we'll think of teaching in terms of combining theory and practice. If we look at strengths-based learning, on the other hand, the teacher is the one who is creating a context in which students are taking the lead. They're taking the learning process into their own hands, and they must decide for themselves what they are going to learn, how they are going to learn it, and if they're actually making enough progress, if they are actually reaching the objectives that have been set. And they have to self-evaluate. So you see those columns again, what they are learning, how they are learning it, and looking at their progress and feedback. If we go back to competence-based learning and we look at the learner's decision-making process, then we see that the learner actually decides on commitment. I think the best way to illustrate this is that as a learner, you can decide whether or not you want to get on board. To what extent do you want to commit to the assignment that your teacher is setting you? For instance, what we find quite often is that students are motivated because they will be marked at the end of the road. So they do what they have to do because they want to pass the course, for instance. Okay. If you look at SBL, we try to get rid of that idea of that external motivation of marks. And what we try to do is to give them the possibility to decide about the content of learning partially, about the progress that they make, the evaluation. So the student is the one who's in the lead when it comes to feedback. They decide when they need help, they decide how they've done, and they're worth pretty much as the teacher. So it's a different approach altogether. And then we go back to competence-based learning and we look at the development. And it says competences define a gap. What do we mean by that? So there's a gap between the initial situation in which the learner finds himself and the objective that is being set by the competence itself. So what do you do to indicate progress as a teacher? You focus quite often on the mistakes that a pupil makes, okay? So if you're doing something wrong, then your error is being indicated. In SBL, on the other hand, we start from strengths. So learning based on their strengths is being encouraged. We want them to actually learn based on their strengths. And another difference would be that in the competence-based learning, a competence is seen as independent. You have to tick a number of boxes. You have to tick several independent competences. Whereas with SBL, you think in terms of lower order skills and higher order skills. And lower order skills are being integrated into higher order skills, and the higher order skills that is what you're after. But the combination is more flexible. Okay, and what we find is that if you provide pupils with the opportunity to use their own strengths, to put forward, to display their higher order skills, that quite often they surprise their teachers. Because if you look at independent competences in competence-based learning, as a teacher, you've got an expectation, and quite often you're very good at interpreting beforehand how well your pupils will be doing. But if you let them combine lower order skills into higher order skills, they might just surprise you. And then finally, the starting point is looked at differently as well. So in a competence-based learning context, the expectance is that you've got a homogeneous group, and the objective of providing differentiation within your classes is to either elevate or lower the level of the objectives that you set for subgroups of your learners. Whereas in SBL, you start from the idea that you've got a heterogeneous group and you actually want them to learn according to their own strengths and speed, etc. Because a student has the opportunity to compensate for a couple of weaknesses by just focusing really on the strengths. I hope that makes sense, because that's a lot of theory squeezed into one slide, obviously. Okay. I briefly referred to this as well, the autogenetic principle and the higher order skills. So the idea is that you create this pathway by yourself to prove that you master the higher order skills. So what we learn to do as a learner within SBL is to combine lower order skills into higher order skills. And as a teacher, you start from the curriculum, obviously, and you create rubrics for that curriculum, and you start from those. So what do you need to achieve, and how can you translate that into skills? Okay, and as a pupil, you base your choices on your strengths and on what provides you energy. That brings me to the 3 processes of creation, which have been displayed at the bottom of the slide. On the one hand, you see that in a scientific process, you've got a methodology, you have to follow certain steps, and the idea is that you get to a certain conclusion. So it's very linear. If you've got a design process, it is also quite linear, but there's an iteration. So you do something a number of times, and in the end, you come up with a certain design or a product or a service. And if you've got an artistic process, then what actually happens is that you've got this multitude of pathways that lead to a multi-layered artwork. Okay, and why is this important that you've got 3 processes of creation? Because a student really wants to use the process that he or she prefers. And this way you can show that there's different forms of knowledge. There's also different ways to come up with knowledge. And in education, there's this predominance, there's a dominant position of the scientific process. And that prevents students quite often from getting equal education opportunities, because not everybody optimally works according to the scientific process. There's students who are better at the design process or better at processes in art. So if we provide students with the opportunity to build their own lessons, we also rely on other processes than just that scientific process, which is very defined and very strict and straightforward. We've got 3 paradigms of talents and strengths. The first one is Gartner, based on the multiple intelligence theory, and he defines talents and strengths as areas of knowledge. So he says a talent is pure knowledge. You've got Peterson and Seligman, and they say that they've got this VIA classification, and it defines strengths and talents as character traits. And they've got 6 virtues, and they've got 24 traits, and it's defined, it's fixed. Within SBL, we turn to Werner and Bloom, and we look at the developmental psychology of the lifespan. And actually what that says is that talents and skills and strengths, those are skills. And if you combine them, that unique combination of skills, to turn them into higher order skills, they're continuously evolving. And by making it partly self-directed, by letting pupils decide what their skills are, and by trusting the fact that they can develop their skills, and that there's the possibility to have a change in skills throughout time. So it's not because you're good at something from the get-go that you continue to only be good at that. So you can actually grow. And that is why we, within SBL, start from Werner and Bloom. If you have a learning-centered approach, then you see that those strengths, that they're actually evolving, and that combination with energy is key. If we look at physics, there's only an amount of energy, and you cannot create more energy. You've got a certain amount of energy, and there's things that drain your energy, and there's things that give you energy. And we want students to work on the things that provide them with energy. Okay. However, there's this pitfall of overemphasizing talents and achievements, which would lead to impaired learning, because you have the tendency to focus on providing feedback to the person rather than providing feedback on the process that the person has run. Okay. Within SBL, you want to provide feedback on that process, and you want to make sure that as a pupil you're discovering your skills, and you want to learn about stuff. And by doing that, by taking that learning into your own hands, you will develop your skills as well. And that brings me to the final part, which is also a bit atypical within education, as we might say. It's about reflection, self-evaluation, and evaluation. And quite often within education, the focus is on evaluation by the teacher. And that is what we try to avoid here. A couple of elements we'll look at. First of all, the first evaluation that we'll put forward within SBL is not linked to objectives. Secondly, we'll look at the OICO principle. Thirdly, we'll have a bit of a quick view on rubrics based on that principle. And then the homework, I think we're going to skip that. The first evaluation is not linked to objectives. That sounds a bit off, doesn't it? So what do we do the first time we evaluate students within SBL? We ask them to talk about their experiences during the lesson, rather than asking them about their experiences connected to the objective. And I'll show you an example of an evaluation that you can use from the age of primary school onwards that will explain this in a minute. But what you do within the first evaluation is you provide your pupils with the opportunity to talk about what is important to them. Okay, and by doing this, what you create is a more equal relationship between teachers and students. They have their own say about what worked for them, what didn't, and why. And it also provides the teacher an insight into what the students have considered to be important during the lesson that took place. So I promised you an example, and here you can just see an example of a number of emoticons. And what we'll ask our pupils is, choose an emoticon. How did you feel? And we'll not ask them why they felt that certain way, but we will ask them, and what were you actually doing when you felt that way? This means that they're not looking at what you wanted them to do, what you intended them to do, but it means that they evaluate how they felt, and as such they will have the opportunity to say what they really want.
Mika, your microphone is out. I don't hear you anymore. No.
Mika, are you there?
No.
I think you have to turn off your Bluetooth device. If it was a Bluetooth headphone, maybe it was out of battery.
No. The red lights on your microphone are also not working. So maybe I'm going to take over for a while. Okay, yeah. Okay, so we use this kind of evaluation to make the students clear that they also have an equal position as a teacher, because they can give their information about the lesson and tell what was important for them. And mostly of the times it is not related to the objectives, but it gives the teacher a lot of information about what is important for them and how do they think about the lesson, even on group dynamics, even on what they felt themselves, etc. Okay. Yeah. Miki, can you go to the next? Yeah, okay. The OICO principle is actually developed in the arts in the first time. And what we combine here is learning strategies together with a form of evaluation. And if you are new in the learning process, most of the times you start with learning by observation and by observing the other ones. And you are learning by looking to the other ones. In the second step, you're going to imitate the others and you're going to learn things by doing what they have done before. Or you can do what the teacher is doing in the class. In the next step, you can learn by discovering new things for yourself. There you start to be creative with the things that were given to you by the teacher. Most of the times in competence-based learning, we even do not ask this part to students. If a student in mathematics can do the exercises which the teacher has given to him, then we find that it is okay. It's a little bit different in languages because they have to be creative if they're writing texts. But this is something that is very important in our way of thinking. And the last way of learning is that you are discovering new things for the other students. And mostly of the times you can do that if you use another skill that was not foreseen in the lesson. In the OICO principle, we want students that they learn to look to themselves with that principle, that we ask them, how did you learn in this lesson? And it gives them information in what the next step is for them. Yeah. But it's very important to know that when the students master a skill,
Bocsi, csak itt hirtelen talán ezt találtam a leggyorsabbnak.
Sorry, somebody was talking through the presentation. Yeah, so it's important when a student master a skill that then he is going to combine all these strategies together. And in evaluation forms, we ask them, how did you learn? And then we ask them, and what did you learn that way? Yeah, so they have a clear insight in their preferred learning strategies, in where they are in the learning phases, etc. Okay, next slide. Yeah, and this is our evaluation form for lessons for strength-based learning. And there you see that the emoticons are coming back at the beginning. Then we give them, we inventorize what they did during the lesson and what were the goals of the lesson. And then they can tell them where showed I my strengths, where can I improve. And then the ARCO principle turns in. And based on the ARCO principle, we ask them, what did you learn and what are your challenges? Where can you improve? And the next question, what do I need, is a very important question, because we ask them, what do I need from the teacher to do it better? Yeah, so the teacher gets his information to work individually with the students. And the last step is, what is my next step? That's for the student to formulate. Okay. To make this happen, yeah, in strength-based learning, you have a lot of learning strategies, learning pathways, and it's not always easy to keep all these things together in your head as a teacher and to evaluate that also in terms of academic results. And that's why we work with rubrics which are based on the ARCO principle. And what we do is that we take the higher order skill and divide that higher order skill in several lower order skills. For example, for creative writing, we start with creative telling, association. Then we have the sub skill of getting materials for your story. We have the sub skill writing in a certain style, and we sum up all these different sub-skills. And for each sub-skill, we are going to define what do we want to see in the observation phase, in the imitation phase, in the creation phase, and in the originality phase. And these rubrics are used by students to evaluate themselves, and are used by teachers to evaluate students and tell them what they are, where they are in the lesson. This is an example of a rubric made for one lesson, and one of these lessons are in the resources. You can find it over there. Yeah. What is different to other ways of evaluation is that we pinpoint clearly that we don't use the word to can, so we try to write it down in what the teacher can see or what a student can experience by him or herself. Yeah. And a second important thing is that if you go to the originality and integration phase, we try to combine these sub-skills and put the combination, the higher order skill, actually over here. Yeah. Some students are working on the observation phase for all the sub-skills and then go for all the sub-skills to the imitation phase. Other students are jumping around. There are students who are starting with a higher, with some of the lowest skills in the rubric, which are the most difficult ones, and try this out and then see what's happening to them in the other sub-skills. And it is linked also to that creative process, design process, and scientific process in the way you are working. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. What's the advantage or the advantage of the rubrics is that we are making the evaluation transparent for teachers and students. In our baccalaureate for youth professional, we are using a rubric built in this way to make their thesis, their bachelor thesis, and students can see very clearly what is the next step, where are my weaknesses, where are my strengths, and they can use them to make the learning process more directed for themselves. Yeah, and students can follow their pathway, their own pathway, can work on sub-skills, connect them to other strengths, working on higher order skills that give insight in lower order skills. And for each lesson, we built a rubric, yeah. But it's also in education, it's more economical, I think, to build rubrics for a course. And use these rubrics to and use part of these rubrics in your lessons. Yeah. Okay. Next slide, Mieke. Yeah. What's very important, if all the students are obliged to use the same learning strategies because you fix them as a teacher, then you will see in the evaluation that everyone is telling the same things. Yeah. So the OICO principle and this way of evaluation works only if students can use different learning strategies, or if you see as a teacher diverse behavioral strategies in your lesson. Yeah. And we strive to foster equality between students and teachers in all parts of the evaluation. And that is something that's very important for us. It's very important that the student can manage his own learning process in the best way that is for him or her suited. Okay, Mieke. Thank you. Okay, where can you find more information? We have the Teach Me website, another European project where we explain the background of strength-based learning. We focus there on class management and the evaluation tools, also the rubrics, and also a way of solving conflicts with students based on strength-based learning. In the HIDA project, also an European project, we worked for the first time with the strength-based learning lessons plans. And yeah, before that we used a lot of other projects here in Belgium to develop all these ways of working. And the group work version that you see over here is one of the ways to work with strength-based learning, but we also developed a lot of other ways to work with the strengths of students. Okay, and maybe very important, in the resources you will find additional lessons to take a look at for different ages and with different topics, so you can dive into that part if you're interested. Thank you very much for your attention. I will follow the new remarks in the chat and will answer them, but it's now time for Nicolas to start his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karel.